Camilla had always possessed a particular kind of quiet intelligence, the sort that allowed her to navigate the treacherous waters of royal protocol with an ease that others found enviable. For years, she had played her role with impeccable grace, standing beside her husband, Prince Charles, as a pillar of support and discretion. Yet, beneath the surface of curtsies and charitable engagements, a more complex narrative had been unfolding, a story known only to a very few, and one that was about to be exposed in the most public of arenas. It began, as these things often do, with a document. Not a love letter, as the tabloids might have hoped, but a series of emails and financial records meticulously gathered by an anonymous source and delivered to the king's most trusted private secretary. The papers detailed a series of transactions and private agreements Camilla had made, unbeknownst to anyone in the royal household, concerning a substantial piece of land attached to her private residence, Ray Mill House. She had been in quiet negotiations with a development corporation, one with questionable ties to foreign investors, to sell a portion of the land for a lucrative housing project. The land, while legally hers, was seen by the family and the local community as an integral part of the private green buffer zone around the estate. The sale would mean a significant profit for Camilla personally, but it would also mean the destruction of ancient woodlands and a fundamental breach of the unspoken trust placed in her to preserve the integrity of the royal environs. For months, she had operated in the shadows, using intermediaries and encrypted communication, believing her actions to be invisible. She had convinced herself that it was a prudent financial decision, a securing of her own future independent of the crown. She had not factored in the tireless work of a few dedicated environmental activists who, through freedom of information requests and dogged detective work, had uncovered the paper trail and, rather than going to the press, had taken the extraordinary step of sending it directly to the palace, hoping for an internal resolution. The morning of the revelation was overcast, a heavy blanket of gray cloud pressing down on the spires of London. The family had gathered for a private luncheon at Clarence House, a seemingly routine affair. The king was present, along with the Prince and Princess of Wales, and a smattering of other senior royals. The atmosphere was congenial, filled with the polite, stilted conversation that often accompanies such gatherings. William was in particularly good spirits, laughing with his wife, Catherine, about a misadventure their eldest son had had with a paint set. He was relaxed, confident in his role as the future king, his laughter a genuine warm sound that filled the room. Camilla, seated near the king, was the picture of serenity. She wore a soft, dove-gray dress and her signature pearl necklace, her smile never wavering as she engaged in pleasantries with a visiting cousin. She had no idea that the private secretary had, just an hour prior, briefed the king and William on the contents of the file. The king, ever the diplomat, was deeply troubled, his face etched with a weary disappointment. Yet William's reaction had been different. He had listened in stunned silence, the information settling into his consciousness like a stone dropping into still water. The ripples of confusion, then disbelief, and finally a cold, hard anger had spread through him. This was not just a financial misdemeanor. It was a betrayal of the family's unspoken code, a violation of the trust that held their precarious institution together. As the luncheon wound down, the king, with a quiet word, requested that Camilla and William join him in his private study. Catherine, sensing the shift in atmosphere, gave her husband a brief, searching look, but he offered her only a tight, reassuring nod. The three of them walked through the elegantly appointed hallways. The portraits of monarchs passed, looking down on them with painted, indifferent eyes. The study, usually a sanctuary of books and leather-bound comfort, felt charged with an unbearable tension. The king closed the heavy oak door behind them. He didn't sit, nor did he offer them a seat. He simply turned to Camilla, his face a mask of sorrow. He held up a thin sheaf of papers. "Camilla," he began, his voice low and even. "I wonder if you could explain these." For a fleeting second, a flicker of something, fear, panic, crossed her features before her composure slammed back into place. "I'm not sure what you mean, Charles," she said, her voice light, a questioning smile on her lips. "The land," the king continued, his tone not unkind but firm. "The negotiations, the development company." The smile on Camilla's face froze. She looked from the king to William, who stood by the window, his back to the gray light. His expression unreadable. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The practiced denials, the elegant evasions, all the tools of a lifetime of social navigation deserted her. She was caught, utterly and completely. William pushed himself off the window frame and walked slowly towards the center of the room. He stopped a few feet from her, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He looked at her, not with the anger of a stepson who felt betrayed, but with the cold, analytical gaze of a future monarch assessing a situation. He studied her for a long, agonizing moment. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant, muffled sound of traffic from the mall. Then, a slow, incredulous smile began to spread across William's face. It wasn't a smile of mirth or amusement. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated disbelief. And the sheer audacity of it, the meticulous planning, the complete disregard for everything the family stood for and all for money, it struck him as so profoundly absurd that the tension in his chest suddenly, inexplicably, broke. A low chuckle escaped his lips. It was a dry, rasping sound that grew into a full-bodied, roaring laugh. He threw his head back and laughed, a deep, genuine, and utterly shocking sound that echoed off the book-lined walls and the solemn portraits. The king stared at his son, aghast. Camilla flinched, as if she had been struck. The sound of his laughter in that moment of high drama was more damning than any accusation. It was the laughter of a man who has seen the punchline to a joke so devastatingly ironic that it leaves him breathless. It spoke of a betrayal so complete that anger was an insufficient response. And only laughter could express the profound cosmic absurdity of it all. He wasn't laughing at her exactly, but at the situation, at the monumental folly of it, at the spectacular collapse of the image she had so carefully constructed. The laughter filled the room, a stark, human sound against the backdrop of centuries of royal decorum, and it signaled the end of one era and the jarring, uncertain beginning of another. The laughter did not last long, but its echo seemed to hang in the air long after William had fallen silent. He wiped a tear from the corner of his eye, the smile still lingering on his lips, though it had lost its incredulous edge and hardened into something else. A grim acknowledgment of the new reality. Camilla stood frozen, her face pale, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The king, in his hands trembling slightly, placed the papers on his desk, the sound a soft, definitive thud. "This is not a matter for humor, William," the king said, his voice strained. "Isn't it, Papa?" William replied, his voice quiet but steady. He finally looked directly at Camilla. All those years, all those speeches about duty, about service, about supporting the crown, and behind it all, you were secretly selling off a piece of it. Not for the family, not for the future, but for, what? A bigger pension fund? Camilla found her voice, though it was a thin, reedy version of her usual confident tone. "You don't understand. It was my land, my private property. It had nothing to do with the crown." It was a sensible financial arrangement. Everything you do has to do with the crown, William cut her off, his voice sharp. You are the queen. You are not a private citizen. The land you sit on, the air you breathe, it all belongs to the institution. The public sees you as its guardian, not its developer. You know this. He gestured to the papers on the desk. Those woods have been there for centuries. They're a part of the community, a part of the landscape. And you were going to sell them to the highest bidder, a company with a reputation for building shoddy, overpriced boxes, and you were going to pocket the money in secret. The king moved to his chair and sat down heavily, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He looked at his wife, the woman he had loved for so long and through so much controversy, and saw a stranger. Why, Camilla? Why didn't you come to me? We could have discussed this. We could have found another way, perhaps a charitable trust. Something that would have preserved the land and provided an income. Because you would have said no. Camilla's composure finally cracked. A flash of anger lit her eyes. You and your endless committees, your consultations, your bloody way forward, this was mine? Something I could control without 100 courtiers poking their noses in. I have given everything to this family. Everything. I have endured years of public scorn, of being painted as the other woman, of walking 2 steps behind, of smiling through every slight. Is it so wrong to want something for myself? A little security that is truly mine? The room fell silent again. Her outburst hung in the air, raw and uncomfortably honest. For the first time, the years of carefully managed silence were broken by a cry of personal frustration. William looked at her, and for a fleeting instant, there was a glimmer of something akin to pity in his eyes. He understood, on some level, the immense pressure she had been under, but the pity was quickly extinguished by the weight of the consequences. Your security is the crown, William said, his voice softer now, but no less firm. Your security is the family. You've just put a very large crack in both. The immediate confrontation was over, but the fallout was just beginning. The next few days were a blur of hushed meetings, panicked phone calls, and frantic strategizing. The king's private office went into overdrive. The first priority was damage limitation. The anonymous activists, it was discovered, had also sent the documents to a major Sunday newspaper with an embargo that expired in 3 days. And the palace had a minuscule window of time to get ahead of the story. Camilla was effectively sequestered at Clarence House. Her public engagements for the following week were canceled, officially due to a tiredness following a busy schedule. The excuse was thin, and the palace press office knew it would only fuel speculation. Inside the family, the atmosphere was glacial. The Prince and Princess of Wales went about their duties with their characteristic professionalism, but Catherine, in private, was furious. She saw it not just as a betrayal of the king, but as a betrayal of her children's future, of the institution they would one day serve. She was a staunch defender of the monarchy's reputation, and this felt like a self-inflicted wound of staggering proportions. William became the driving force behind the palace's response. And he was relentless, pragmatic, and utterly unsentimental. He argued against any attempt to cover it up or spin it. The truth will come out, he told his father in one tense meeting. The only question is whether it comes out with us looking like we tried to hide it, or with us looking like we are dealing with it. The king, torn between his love for his wife and his duty to the crown, eventually agreed. A statement was drafted, not by the usual press officers, but with William looking over every word. It was a masterpiece of controlled honesty. It confirmed that the Queen had been in discussions regarding a piece of her private land. It stated that upon learning of these discussions, The King and the Prince of Wales had expressed their profound disappointment and had made it clear that such actions were incompatible with her role as a senior member of the royal family. It announced that all negotiations had been immediately terminated, that the land would be placed into a permanent conservation trust, and that the Queen had apologized unreservedly and would be withdrawing from public life for a period of reflection. When the newspaper broke its story on Sunday morning, the headline was dramatic, but the accompanying narrative was already diffused. The palace's preemptive strike had worked. The public narrative shifted from one of scandal and cover-up to one of a family swiftly and decisively correcting a serious error in judgment. The editorials were mixed. Some called for Camilla to step down permanently, and others praised the King and William for their firm handling of the situation. But the overwhelming sentiment was one of disappointment, a sense that the one person who had finally found public acceptance had, in a moment of stunning folly, jeopardized it all. For Camilla, the weeks that followed were a form of internal exile. She remained at Clarence House, her world shrinking to its elegant rooms and the small walled garden. The King visited her, of course, their meetings fraught with a sadness that neither could fully articulate. He loved her, but he was also deeply disappointed in her. He couldn't understand the greed, the secrecy, the fundamental lack of judgment. She, in turn, felt a mixture of shame and resentment. She had been foolish, she knew that now. But a part of her still clung to the belief that she had been entitled to do what she wanted with her own property. The silence from William was the loudest of all. He did not visit. He did not call. He communicated only through formal channels, his private secretary exchanging terse notes with hers regarding practical matters. It was as if a door had been slammed shut, and she was on the outside looking in. The laughter in the study, she now understood, had not been a moment of cruel humor. It had been the sound of his respect for her dying, and she was finding that a dead respect was far harder to revive than a deadened affection. Months passed. The Conservation Trust for the Woodlands was established, and William, in a carefully orchestrated piece of public relations, visited the site with a group of school children, planting a tree and speaking eloquently about the importance of preserving the natural heritage for future generations. The irony was not lost on anyone. He was subtly and effectively cementing his own image as the future guardian of the realm, a direct contrast to the actions that had precipitated the crisis. Camilla's period of reflection came to an end, and she slowly began to return to public duties. But it was a tentative, diminished return. Gone were the high-profile foreign tours. Instead, she focused on smaller, local engagements, literacy charities, osteoporosis groups, her core interests, but without the fanfare. The public, ever fickle, seemed willing to forgive, or at least to forget. The tabloids moved on to other scandals, but within the family, the dynamic had been permanently altered, and it was at the annual Christmas Day church service in Sandringham that the new reality was on full display for the world to see. The family walked the short path from the house to the church of St. Mary Magdalene, greeting the well-wishers who lined the route. The King walked with Camilla, their interaction polite but lacking the easy intimacy of previous years. A few steps behind, William and Catherine walked with their children, the picture of a modern, happy family. As they reached the church porch, a moment of choreographed chaos ensued as the family paused to allow photographers to take their pictures. William, holding his daughter Charlotte's hand, looked up. His eyes met Camilla's for the first time in months. It was a fleeting glance, lasting barely a second. There was no anger in it, no coldness, but there was also no warmth. That for an almost imperceptible moment before she turned away and followed the King into the church. In that brief, unguarded second, the full weight of her loss was visible. She had not just lost a piece of land or a financial opportunity. She had lost the trust of her stepson, and with it, any hope of an uncomplicated, unshadowed future within the family she had fought so hard to join. The laughter in the study had been the beginning of the end, and this empty glance on a cold Christmas morning was the quiet, final confirmation. The deception had been revealed, the laughter had faded, and all that was left was the long, slow work of living with the consequences.